In this tutorial, I will show you how easy it is to start working with Cavalry for your motion graphics projects. So if you are an animator or an After Effects user and was wondering how do you start with Cavalry, I will show you how. I'll give you a quick overview of how to navigate the software and we will complete a short animation project together. So when you download the Cavalry, this is what you will see in your default workspace. Now, I like to work a little bit differently, but let me explain. We've got color palettes over here. You can just pick different colors and so on. Alignment tools, attribute editor, which we'll go over in a second, the asset browser, and the main timeline. Pretty standard stuff. So the way I like to work is by having everything on one side that I will need, like color tools. I don't need that, and a line tool over here. I move this one to the very front. So this way I've got all my properties on one side, my composition and my timeline here. Okay, pretty simple stuff. So asset browser, this is where you have all your layers, assets, fonts, images, compositions, and so on here. Now, you can resize windows as you need them, like this. We've got a bunch of shape options here, cameras, pen tools, and so on. Pretty standard stuff. On the top shelf, you have demo scenes, which you can check out to see how certain things are created. Like, for example, text fall off. And if we move this is what happens. These demo scenes are included by Cavalry team, so you can see how everything is built and try to replicate it if you're curious about certain effects. Now, let's go back to the tutorial. So on top, we have tool shelf with various tools, and Duplicator, which we'll be using a lot, extrusion, physics, particles, auto animators, and different rigs, and so on. Now, this is basic overview, right? So you have the project panel, timeline, and our composition. So how do you change composition size? It's pretty simple. If you go to composition settings, you got a pop-up here as well. You can click on this button over here or use Command K shortcut. You have frame range, playback, time rate, and so on. So I'm going to change this to 100 frames. If you like to work with seconds instead of frames, simply hold Alt or Option and click in this area over here, and your composition timeline will change from frames to seconds. I'm just going to leave it as it is. So how do you get started? Pretty simple. You can create any shape you want. You got text tools. If I just click, you got Cavalry. And this is what the attribute editor comes into play. If you're familiar with After Effects, you have all the options available to you underneath the layer. And then things like text, you have text panel to make changes to text, and so on and so on. Cavalry has everything combined in one attribute editor with multiple tabs. This menu is contextual, so if I create, for example, a rectangle and select it, it's slightly different than the one for text. So let's go over the available properties to you. So I have text layer selected, and we've got basic things like position, rotation, pivot point. This is your anchor point for people who use After Effects. You have opacity, blend modes, and the Deformers menu. This is where you access all the modifiers available to you, and you can apply them to the layer directly. Filters are different than modifiers. This is stuff like drop shadow, contrast, glow, and so on. Basically, think about this like styling your layer, and deformers as deforming your layer or deforming the mesh itself. Motion blur options and so on. In case of a text, this is how you type in basically. And the whole thing is updated nicely. You can pick your fonts, font sizes, alignment, and so on. So pretty standard stuff. You got a couple more options like background. So this is where we can create a background shape for your text that stays attached. And this is everything gets created automatically with one click. Now I'm going to delete this. We got fill options, pretty standard. You have hex codes, RGB as well, and alpha is here. So you can do fade using alpha or opacity. Options for stroke. If I zoom in, you can see what's happening here. You can make it thicker. Different options for bevel and so on. Mask tab is basically for masks or track mattes. At the moment, Cavalry only has alpha mattes available. It doesn't have luma matte, so you can matte your layers using opacity, but you cannot use lightness. This will change in the future updates. And advanced tab, which is basically things like marking layer hidden, freezing calculations, and so on. Some more advanced options. So this is pretty standard stuff. Shape layers are similar as well. Fill, stroke, masks, advanced tabs. The only difference is, like in case of a shape layer, you can easily pick a different shape layer from this drop-down menu. And you have your width and height control, radius. And the beautiful thing about this is you can specify individual radius for each corner. In After Effects, you cannot do that without a script or a plugin or kind of a preset. So it's nice that this is built in inside the Cavalry. One thing you should know about Cavalry is it has two types of shapes. So similar like After Effects is that I can edit this shape like width and height and change its properties, but I can make this shape editable so then I can access the vertex positions. So if I right click, select make editable, and as you can see, we have a copy of this shape. It's marked as editable, but we don't have access to the shape properties. This is useful if I press A and I further want to customize individual parts of the shape. For example, if I'm creating some sort of a character. Okay, I'm going to delete everything and let's create some sort of animation. If you click and drag, you will draw shapes by yourself like this, like you can custom draw shapes. But if you Alt and click on a shape, and the shape will be created for you automatically in the center. Same thing applies in all the other shapes. You have all the properties for them. So let's create something. I'm going to Alt click on the rectangle. We have our rectangle layer and I'm going to make the layer 50 by 50. Now, Cavalry works in a way that you can link things to each other. So if I hover over any property and it's highlighted blue like this, I can take this property and feed this information somewhere else. So for example, I can link the width with height. Okay, so we have our rectangle. Now let's put this into a duplicator. So if I hold Alt or Option and click on a duplicator, then we will have a duplicator created, and this shape is part of the duplicator as an input shape. So let me explain what duplicator is. Duplicator basically takes your input shapes and, well, duplicates them or modifies the geometry in a specific way, like makes number of copies. It's similar how you can duplicate shapes in After Effects, except, and the only difference in Cavalry is that you can actually modify each one of these shape layers because they are actually active mesh. So let's have a look at Duplicator. As you can see, the menu is slightly different. We have shape properties, mask and advanced only. We don't have fill and color and so on, but that's fine. We'll go over this in a second. In Duplicator, you can have up to 3 or more similar properties on one layer. What I mean by this, we have position property for the whole duplicator, then we have X and Y and width positions for the shape layers themselves, and another properties for the shape position, which is separate from the duplicator overall position. It's a little bit confusing, but think about this. These main properties control entire duplicator. Well, these shape position properties, they can control individual shapes. At the moment, I'm controlling them as a group, but we will change that in a second and it will be more clear. So Duplicator has quite a lot of distribution methods, but we'll focus on the grid distribution in this tutorial. So let's use this composition size as our basically size for the distribution. I'm going to scale this down a little bit so everything fits nicely and make it maybe 10, 20, and I like even numbers, so 18, 15 will do. Now we can duplicate the shapes very easily, like so. So as you can see, Duplicator is doing its job correctly. Now, didn't mention this bottom shelf, but this shelf has a number of properties. So we've got our transparency checkerboard, which is not visible because our composition has a background color which is white. But if I turn this down, as you can see, there is transparency. There we go. And we've got options for the viewport quality if your computer is struggling to run this. But what's interesting is you can turn on draw debug information. And if you click on the duplicator, you will see basically an index number for each shape created. So as you can see, index starts from 0 all the way to 299. So that's important. It will come in play in a second. I'm going to turn this off because it's a little bit too much. So let's do something interesting with this. I'm going to color tab, and Cavalry has a bunch of color options. It has a generator for the colors, so you can pick different ways to generate the color and it will automatically generate color values as you need, for example x6 and so on. But what I'm going to use is a swatch, and Cavalry comes with a number of swatches, number of palettes built in. So if I click on this drop down menu, I'm going to pick a random swatch, something like right, which is perfect. So I would like to apply all of these colors to every single one of these shapes. So how can we do this? It's very simple. Cavalry works with arrays. So if I click on this this hamburger menu, we can easily create an array from palette. And as you can see, we have a new layer. And this is an array. An array is simply a list of properties. It could be colors, it could be layers, text layers, shapes, and so on and so on. But let's focus on the color. So we have a color array. Now, you remember how we connected one property with another. Now we can do the same by connecting layers with each other. So for example, I want to use the color information from this layer and affect every single shape. So what I need to do is just grab this little pick whip over here at the end and drag on top of my shape layer. if I cannot connect the layer with one with another, the pick whip will turn into red. So if I drag the pick whip and release on top of the shape layer, I will see available properties to me that I can use to make a connection. So in this case, we have fill color. If I click on it, as you can see, everything is colorful. And the best part about this is that this is all responsive because everything is connected to a single source. As you can see, you can change, you can add, you can remove those colors. So previously I mentioned indexes, and that's important. So as you can see, we are using auto index to basically color every single shape in this order from green, blue, yellow, orange to teal, and again and again and again. So basically we're repeating the index across every single row. Now it would be good if we could mix it up a little bit. So what we can do is select color array, uncheck index. So this way we are using this value, the index property for the whole color array, to select color for every single rectangle. And if I modify this, this will change accordingly to this number. So 2 is yellow. Now is a good time to introduce modifiers. So if I right click on this index layer, we have contextual menu and we can add a behavior. And what I'm interested in is noise. So if I click on it, we have connection to another modifier called noise. Now this is a noise modifier and it has new properties. Basically this layer outputs noise values between -10 and 10. Now our color array is in between 0 and 4. So if we change these values to 0 and 4, then everything will be mapped according to these colors, as you can see. And if I press play, then since the noise is animated, all the colors are shifting dynamically. So we created this animation without creating a single keyframe. Let's create another shape. I'm going to create an ellipse and maybe 5-side polygon and a star. And maybe this super ellipse. So what I want to do is do the same thing as before, which is basically set the same size for every single shape. So I'm going to set ellipse at 25 because it's at radius. Polygon at 50 as well. Star shape at 50 and super ellipse at 50. And what we need to do now is basically plug all of these shapes into Duplicator into input shapes and connect to new index. And as you can see, now we're using ellipse as our source layer inside our duplicator. We have 2 over here. So if I do the same thing with polygon, star, and super ellipse, there we go. Turn them off. So what we have now is basically a number of layers duplicated, but some of them are slightly bigger than my rectangles. So I'm going to correct that by changing the size of a polygon. Star shape needs to be smaller, and whereas the super ellipse needs to be smaller too. Perfect. Make it slightly bigger. So to keep things organized, I can select these layers, press Command and G and create a group. simply rename them and drag the noise layer down to the underneath the color array, because this is how you parent layers inside Cavalry. So what we need to do next is I'm going to turn off the drawback information. What I want to do next is a few things. First, I want to use this color array and noise to affect every single shape. But I don't want to keep dragging the connections between every single shape here. I want to do this on duplicator level. So this way, it doesn't matter how many source shapes I have. All of them will use the colors from this array. So how do we do this? Basically, we need to select Duplicator and select the formers and select something called submesh. Submesh is a modifier that allows us to access properties of every single mesh that is part of Duplicator. Parent it, so this way I can use option to replace fill, as you can see, and simply now just drag and drop the color array onto fill, and now everything is basically colored with our color array and the noise. Now this is a little bit static to my taste, so what I want to do is I want to change the order of the shapes using this noise. So if you look at the duplicator and your input shapes, you can see that they have an index value, it's like 0 to 4. Now we have noise that goes from 0 to 4. So what we can do is simply affect the shape ID. If I turn off the auto ID, I can select different shapes with a single value, or if I use index and drag and drop, then I will dynamically change the shape with a color. There you go, with a corresponding color. So if I play this, now we have different shapes appearing with different color. So basically, each shape has assigned color based on the index of the color array. So if I change this to something darker, as you can see, everything easily updates. Now the last thing I would like to do is to use shape scale to modify the scale of these objects. But I want to do this in using this noise layer. Now, if I simply connect scale to scale and then grab the index, noise index, and drop it into here, this is what happens. Everything is a little bit too big. Now, the reason for this is our noise goes from 0 to 4. However, our shapes are at the scale of 0 to 1. So we want to remap the values from 0 to 4 to 0 to 1. And the way we can do this is very easily by right-clicking on the shape scale, go to behavior, and we need to find a modifier called number range and select only X property. Everything disappears, which is fine. So this number range modifier works in similar way as linear expression in After Effects. Basically, this modifier takes values and outputs different values, and you can further remap them with a graph, or offset them, clamp them, and so on. So what we need to do is basically I'm going to pin this modifier to our modifier stack, select the noise index, pin it as well. So our source is minimum at 0, which is fine, max at 4, which we're gonna change here. And the values I want to get out of this is again 0 to 1. And I need to grab this noise modifier because I need to get the data from this layer and plug it into our value. And as you can see, everything is remapped perfectly. However, it is a little bit too small for my liking, because if I play this, there we go. We can further remap it, and instead of going to 0, I could go maybe 0.3. There you go. So this is a very powerful modifier for remapping values. So I'm going to unpin this. As you can see, everything is connected to each other, and if I scroll, those values dynamically update, and if I play, everything is animated and it looks like the whole thing is breathing. Now the best part is, since we are controlling the colors and then the order of the shapes and then the sizes from one noise modifier, we can play with it. So I'm basically using low frequency, small stagger to have basically those kind of islands of shapes. And I'm using timescale, which is basically I'm speeding up this noise so it works faster than the current time on the timeline. Now the best part about noise modifier is we can easily loop it by selecting this option. Type in number of frames we want to loop. So if I play this, you can see everything is perfectly animated, is perfectly loopable. There we go. So that's a little bit less hectic. Now this might be quite a lot of information on the first go, but as you can see, this is pretty straightforward to use. You're simply plugging in some layers into each other, using modifiers to affect number of layers at the same time, like changing the color, changing the shape, scale, and so on, and using arrays to change the order of the layers, how they, how the color changes, which shapes are appearing and with which color, and so on. Now, how do we export our composition? It's pretty straightforward. Simply select your comp, go to File, Render Manager. You can click plus, this plus button, to add the current composition to the render queue. Basically, you select a path, which is pretty straightforward. A resolution scale, keep it at 100% if you want to get the whole thing exported at the 100% resolution. Quality, full, to have the highest quality possible. Format, pick format you need. I recommend QuickTime, ProRes 4:2, and then compress it further down the line with something like a shutter encoder or handbrake. You don't have to worry about this other menus because this is for like dynamic rendering and stuff like that, but for the simple rendering, this will do perfectly, the output and the format. And once you're happy, just click render and the whole thing is done. Hopefully this gives you a nice quick overview how to use Cavalry and how to use a number of layers and different modifiers and how to use them together to create complex animations very easily. If you have any questions, drop the comments below or reach out on the official Cavalry Discord channel where I'll be able to help you out. Thanks again for watching.